Greetings to all of my educated magic friends out there on YouTube. I am your host, Jeff Kowalk, here on Erudite Magic. Today we're going to talk about a brand new release from Squash Publishing. Yes, you may recall the name of this Chicago magic book publishing house because we talked about it right here on Erudite Magic a few weeks ago when we were talking about our top 5 magic book publishers. Squash was number 5 in our rankings, and if you recall, they publish a lot of books, not just about tricks, but also about magic history, into which category this book falls. This week, we're going to be talking about the brand new and amazing John Fisher's Heroes of Magic. If, like me, you were actually not that familiar with John Fisher before this book, let me give you just a brief history. John Fisher is a UK magician, TV producer, and author who has written over a dozen books on the subject of magic and magicians. In fact, I already own one of the books that he's written, which is the Cardini Miracle Factory book. In addition to writing books about magicians and for magicians, he also produced some amazing magic on TV for British audiences. No doubt if you're in the UK, you already know his name. Regardless, he was a bit new to me, and I thoroughly enjoyed this book. One of the television shows that John Fisher produced was called John Fisher's Heroes of Magic, hence where this book gets its name. In this book, the author covers 25 magicians and gives you insights into their lives and careers in magic. What qualifies John Fisher to write about this? Well, in this book, he explains that he knew, I believe, all but 2 of the magicians personally and produced most of them on TV at some point. In many cases, if he didn't know the person, he's done extensive research to bring you some very interesting aspects of their lives. Let's get this out of the way right away. This isn't a book of tricks. It is a book of magic history. Now, that's not to say that you won't learn anything about performing magic for audiences. In fact, I believe you will definitely learn things about performing by reading this book. In many of the insights he provides, he is actually telling you what a person's act was composed of. What tricks did they perform? What order? How did they interact with the audience? What made them tick and what made them do so well with their performing styles. Many of the names covered in this book you will already know and love. You'll hear about people like Slidini, Chan Canasta, Billy McComb, David Devant, Cardini, Fred Capps, Paul Daniels, Rene Lavande, Harry Blackstone Jr., and many others. Of course, if you're like me and you don't know every magician who's ever existed, you'll also be introduced to some fantastic magicians and learn something about them and their magic. Let's talk about some of the physical dimensions of the book for a second. This is a beautiful hardbound book, over 400 pages with full color. The pages are what I'll call a semi-gloss type look, so there is a little bit of gleam in the light, but it's not overly shiny when you're reading under an intense light. If you remove the beautiful dust jacket, you end up with a lovely cloth bound with gold embossed lettering on both the front and the spine of the book. There are lots and lots of gorgeous lithographs and posters and pictures and letters, things to adorn the inside of the book and enrich the reading experience. As you've heard me talk about in other videos, and specifically the top 5 magic ones, I am a sucker for history books about magic. I love the old-time flair of some of the all-time great magicians. I love their marketing, their style, the way they conducted themselves. At the beginning of each chapter, he breaks out a quote about the magician, whether it's something that he said about them, something someone else said about them, or a quote from the magician themselves. This really helps you to get a feel right away for who this person is and what's going to be important in this chapter on this magician. Each chapter will leave you with nuggets of wisdom from these old-time masters or from John himself, things that will help you in your own development. Although I enjoyed the book immensely, there were 2 chapters that I found particularly disappointing. And because it's always my goal to shoot straight with you guys, I want you to know about it before you think about buying this book. Don't worry, these weren't quality issues. Gabe Fajuri from Squash Publishing did an excellent job of publishing this as well as everyone who was involved with the process. It's just a gorgeous book and a ton of fun to read through. I read it cover to cover as quickly as I could because I was just enjoying soaking in all of the old-time magic. Anyway, the 2 chapters where I had a problem. The first one was about Paul Daniel. And one of the things I did know about John Fisher was that he produced the Paul Daniels Magic Show for quite a while. I expected there to be a lot more great things to say about Paul Daniels because in every other chapter, John Fisher goes out of his way to bend over backwards and say some incredibly nice things about the performers. He tells you in the Paul Daniels chapter that there was some bad blood between him and Paul. It didn't start that way, and I felt that John was very fair in the way that he built Paul up early on in the chapter, but I also could feel an underlying current in that chapter of some tension. He eventually shares this with you and starts to talk about how he and Paul Daniels didn't get along later on in Paul Daniels' career. Now, this was disappointing to me because it took me out of the story. In all of the chapters leading up to the Paul Daniels chapter, John Fisher did a pretty good job of keeping himself out of the narrative, or at least as an ancillary player, and making sure you understood where his connection with the performer began, but he didn't take over as the hero of the story himself. In the Paul Daniels chapter, that wasn't true. I felt like his relationship with Paul Daniels, or lack thereof, dominated the chapter, and he concluded by saying that he has so many fond memories of working with Paul Daniels, and yet I didn't get that same feeling from the chapter. I get it that he had to discuss that relationship. I'm sure enough people know about their falling out that it was something he had to cover. But I also felt that it was slightly unfair and a little one-sided given that Paul Daniels is no longer with us and unable to share his side of that story. Don't get me wrong, it didn't ruin the book for me. In fact, it may have made it more interesting if you're into that sort of back and forth. The second chapter that made me slightly uncomfortable is similar to the Paul Daniels chapter, and it's about Ricky Jay. John Fisher had a relationship with Ricky Jay, and somewhere along the way, things kind of soured. He gives the impression that he really has no idea and isolates it down to possibly 2 things. But again, with Ricky Jay's passing, we'll never really know the answer, and it just didn't feel as warm as some of the other chapters to me. I want to reiterate, it in no way took away from the enjoyment of the book. I still loved every page of it. Just those 2 chapters I found slightly disappointing for that reason and wanted you to know about it. That aside, John does an excellent job of really diving into each one of these characters, what makes them tick, why they're so spectacular, and why he truly respects the magic that they've created and put on stage for audiences around the world. Some of the stories he shares are sad, others are uplifting, some funny. In short, there's a variety of characters to meet in a book like this. There's a very nice index in the back of the book, so if you're trying to jump around or want to remember where he referenced another magician who maybe didn't have their own chapter, you can easily find it. There are lots of different types of magic performers in the book. There are those who performed big illusions like Robert Harbin, and there are those who performed mostly with a pack of playing cards like Ricky Jay. Each one of these people made an impression on John Fisher and certainly made an impression on me as the reader. I was very happy to get to know more about them and found myself at the end feeling very satisfied with what I had learned about some of magic's greatest magicians. So, who is this book for? If you are a student of history, especially magic history, this is definitely going to be up your alley. If you're new to magic, this may also be for you because this will quickly introduce you to approximately 25 of the biggest names in the last century of magic. This book retails for $75, and really I think that's kind of a bargain for a huge, thick, full color book with so much care and attention that went into it. Frankly, I think you would expect to pay over $100 for a book this size and of this caliber. So I was very surprised at how affordable it is, and certainly if you want to save even more buying it, Don will have these in stock. That's what I've got for you this week. I hope you will consider checking out John Fisher's Heroes of Magic, put out by Squash Publishing. Until next time, all my erudite friends, keep reading.